And now we are going to turn to Habibah al-Hinai. And Habibah, your family has also been directly impacted by gender discriminatory nationality laws. And you too have been a tireless advocate for reform in quite a challenging context. How did you come to be an advocate for women's equality and nationality rights? And have you seen any progress since you have become active on this issue?
Thank you, Excellency. Hello to everyone. So I am a human rights activist since 1990, but at the beginning I was advocating for the rights that the government are happy with, such as charity, women in sports. But in year 2000, I started campaigning for the rights of children with Omani mothers who are married to non-Omanis. Some of them were stateless. The unfair laws and legislations opened my eyes shortly after the birth of my son, who is a German citizen from a divorced Omani mother. When my son was born in 1998, I came to realize that I could not issue a residence permit neither for my son nor for my husband then. Actually, I will give you an example. When my son was born premature, when I was at the hospital, I got married with a permit. I had a permission from my government. So I was in the hospital, my son was premature and he had to be in an incubator for 10 days. Then suddenly I received this heavy bill that I had to pay. So I told them, but I'm Omani, why? It's free medical care here. They said, but you have a foreigner child. But I said, until I walked into the hospital, I wasn't paying anything. But I said, yeah, but now this creature is a foreigner, you have to pay the bill. So because my son's residence also was linked with his father's residence, and his father's residence was linked with his work permit. And if he loses his work, his job, he has to leave the country with his father. At the beginning, I started raising this issue in the local media. I was interviewed in local TV channels, radio stations, and newspapers and magazines. I was hoping that the Omani government will act fast to fix this complicated issue when they became aware about the level of gender discrimination and the violations against women's rights and their children. Especially, this practice violates Omani law, which affirms that all citizens are equal. In 2007, I interviewed hundreds of Omani mothers in a similar situation. I gathered evidence of more than 100 such cases and submitted them to the Ministry of Social Development, but no changes. These women were suffering from discrimination under the law. Their children do not have the right of residency permits in their mother's land, nor benefit from higher education, work in Oman, and cannot inherit their mother's property, receive their mother's nationality, and many of them were stateless. And worst of all, they must leave the country after when they're at age of 18. So it was obvious that these women were subjected to exploitation and extortion in order to obtain a residency from private company owners. Also, they had no choice but to issue a company permit under their names, and they can register their husbands and children as their employees. So some of them will be their mother's drivers or domestic worker, because it's cheaper to renew the permits in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. These unfair circumstances added an extra huge burden on the shoulders of these families. So I'll be talking about Omani stateless persons in Oman and in the countries which have a large population of people of Omani origin. The history of Oman is closely linked with East African countries, especially Zanzibar, Burundi, Kenya, etc. I was born myself in a small, tiny island called Pemba in Zanzibar, where thousands of Omanis immigrated to settle in East Africa countries before the oil boom. In search for a better life, Omani sultans ruled Zanzibar and its neighboring countries for hundreds of years until the coup in 1964, which saw the end of the Omani rule in Zanzibar. However, as soon as the coup against the Omani rule in Zanzibar took place, there was a reverse migration back to Oman. As a result, thousands of Omanis returned to their motherland. At that time, soon after the new Sultan took power in 1970, it was possible to return to Oman. The new Sultan called upon the Omani people from all over the world to return to their motherland to contribute in the process of building their country and development. And this coincided with the beginning of the oil era. The country was then in urgent need for manpower and competences. A few years later, the Omani government closed the doors of the right to return of the Omanis once it reached the sufficiency of external expertise. And with time, turned its back from accepting the requests of thousands of Omanis who demanded the right to return, including thousands of women, mothers, and their children, who are stranded in East Africa and stateless till this date. Many women who managed to return to Oman some of them decided to marry to extend families in East Africa. So, and many of their children are stateless because they cannot issue residence permits for their husbands. So the husband is in Tanzania and the mother and the children is in Oman, and they don't want to issue Tanzanian nationality, so they stay in the country stateless for years until their 20s and 30s. Moreover, blogging is another outlet I used to draw attention to human rights violation. I started an online campaign to demand our rights. A week ago, and coinciding with this conference, the Oman Association for Human Rights launched the Right to Return campaign in order to deliver to the international community the voice of thousands of marginalized Omanis in East Africa who demand their right to return to their motherland. The Oman Association for Human Rights has also received dozens of complaints from trapped Omani origins in Burundi and Zanzibar, with hundreds of signatures for being victims of discrimination and statelessness. In April 2016, just before my son reached 18 years of age and had to leave his beloved country, Oman, where he was born and lived there all his life, I prepared a petition demanding the Omani government to change this unfair law. This petition was signed by hundreds of Omani women and many sympathized men, but still no changes were made. 2 weeks ago, exactly on the 2nd of June, the Omani Ministry of Interior issued the regulations for the new Omani nationality law. This new law was nicely polished, but still includes gender discrimination. Of course, my time here does not allow me to go to every single detail, but I will just quote Article 3, which says, "It shall be noted that the ministry reserves the right to reject any application without providing any reason whatsoever," because it includes that the mother has the right to apply for citizenship, and she has to pay like $670 per child, and plus she has to submit a list of demands, like she's clear of criminalization. I mean, what it has to do with the children if she's a criminal, for instance. So another Article 11, it says, "A person shall be deemed Omani national in the following cases. Number one, he if he is born in Oman or abroad and his father, quote, father, at the time of birth was an Omani national. So I'm very much interested, because this law is just 2 weeks ago, to know in the next few years how many Omani children from non-Omani father granted nationality. That's how we can, decide if this law is fair or not. So finally, despite my peaceful and legitimate human rights work in Oman, I was arrested, threatened, persecuted, and forced to flee my beloved country, Oman, to Germany, where I live now with my son. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a very interesting story. And it's fascinating to hear about all the advocacy work that you have been doing. And I'm sure that you have played not just a small part in provoking this new changed legislation in Oman. And let's hope that it's going to be, as you said, you will see the changes in the next few years, that it will actually be a more open process and changing a bit the situation. So congratulations for your work. Thank you. We are now going to